Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture video for English Comp 2, where we're talking about planning research and research topics. So, I'm going to get it straight out the gate. Research is a process. And I know it probably sounds ridiculous and you're probably like, yeah, that makes sense, but no, this is very important. A lot of people think research is a one and done thing. You do research once and you're done. And that's not true. Research is a process. It's a process that, yes, you do in stages. Yes, sometimes you can do multiple stages at once, but you should never be truly done with it. You should always be willing to come back depending on what it needs. So research is a process. And honestly, it should be goal-oriented. What do I mean by that? I mean goal-oriented is you have a particular goal in mind. When you are conducting research, there should be a goal to your research. What are you trying to find out? Are you trying to experiment with certain factors and come out to a positive conclusion? Are you trying to find out the origins of something? Are you trying to discover a hidden meaning that's been lost forever? What is your goal? So that's what I mean. Research is goal-oriented. And it also should ask specific questions. And if you remember last time, we talked about some of those questions. We remember the who, what, when, where, why, how. Yeah, those are the early levels to those specific questions. How did this happen? Why did this happen? When did it begin? Those are specific questions. And so research should be asking those questions. And honestly, you should be providing the answers to those questions when you find them. And like I said, it is a multi-step process. Sometimes research starts with doing some initial research, finding out some base information, going back, applying it, and then saying, okay, what's the next step? What more do I need to find out? What does that next step look like? How much research do I need to conduct? Does it change the research question? Do I need to ask different questions? Do I experiment? It's a multi-step process. But we also need to talk about, if you remember, we said there's a difference between a research essay and a source-based essay, where we simply are providing support for what we already know. Research is doing that, so you're still finding sources. So source-based is showing sources that make a statement. There is no question, only information or answers. We want to bring these two together. We want to make a research question and a research paper that has source-based evidence. Okay? So let's talk about research questions, specifically good research questions. Good research questions can be answered at least partially objectively. So hear me when I say that again. Good research questions can be answered at least partially objectively. And what I mean by objectively is, I mean it is not subjective, it's not depending on the person, no. If a completely neutral person looks at that and goes, yeah, okay, that is objective. Not subjective, objective. One of the things that we try to emphasize with this is this should not be values-based. Values-based questions and answers are problematic. And I'm going to say this now. We are not getting into a debate on whether or not it's right or wrong, but two topics that tend to be very values-based in response. So I would say are two arguments you should not be making in this class, aka not the subject of your research paper. But two arguments that have a hard time being answered objectively because they're value-based are regarding the death penalty and regarding abortion. Both issues, there are ways to talk about them objectively, but oftentimes the arguments and debates come out of values-based personal beliefs. A lot of times people argue about the death penalty, talking about the morality of killing or not killing. They talk about their personal belief of what is fair punishment and all of these things. Those are not objective. Those are subjective. Those are values-based. And same goes for abortion. A lot of times the argument has nothing to do with medical. It has to do with, is it right to kill a child? And then the argument of whether a fetus or a collection of cells or whatever counts as a child or not. Those are values-based, not objective. They are subjective. So that's why those are two good examples of topics you should not do, because they are not good research topics. Because they have a hard time being answered at least partially objectively. They tend to be very heavily subjective. So there's my hint to you. Those are not approved topics. Anyway, good research questions should be at least partially objective. They should be as objective as possible. It should be what motivates people to believe in conspiracy theories. That is a question that is not values-based. You're looking at the cause of buying into conspiracy theories. It's not values-based. Their reasoning for falling into it may be values-based, but the process of looking for it is not. You see what we're doing here? I know it might be a little confusing, but I'm trying to help paint a picture with this. Another sign of a good research question is that it can be answered with pre-existing information or knowledge that can be gathered. The idea here is that you can answer this question without having to reinvent the wheel. You can pull in information that already exists to help formulate your answer. You can bring in some ideas that already are out there that can help answer a question that just hasn't been asked yet. So that's fair. But very important, while we do want pre-existing information and we want that stuff to be available, a good research question will not be answered completely or in a specific way. And often the best way to do this is if a quick Google search can answer your question fully, it's not a research question. So if your question is, why are some snakes venomous and others not? It's a good question, but if you type that in, Google's going to give you a pretty straightforward answer. And heck, I'm inclined to believe the AI overview because it's probably pulling from a lot of actual nature blogs that are honest about it. So not really a great research question. Now, if you want to dive deeper into the evolutionary history of snakes and look at something about that, that's something different. Maybe you look at why specifically do venomous snakes have particular patterning. Now that might not be a question that's answered fully. That might require deeper digging. I'm going to argue right now, please do not make that your research question, because I think that requires hands-on research and testing and things like that, and you don't have the time to do that in this class. I'd love to hear it, but I don't think that's good for this class. But I'm hoping that my examples, as outlandish and silly as some of them are, you can see that a good research question we can find information for, can be partially answered, is fairly objective, but hasn't been fully answered. There's still mystery out there. Because that's the point of a research question. You're trying to answer it. So you don't want the answer out there right away. You want to find the answer. Maybe you have the answer, you just didn't realize it yet. So, how do we refine a topic or a research question? And honestly, these are just some strategies. I want to emphasize there's no right way to do it. If you remember back to the very first lecture, I said there is no one right way to do research. And that comes into even to refining a topic or a research question. There is not one direct reason or one direct answer to doing that. Some people say focus on a single event. So if you're looking at, a long history of how different events influence something, maybe focus on one single event. That might help you focus your topic and get a better research question. It might be limiting to a specific time period, especially if you're picking something. Another one that tends to be brought up a lot is global warming. The time period that you're looking at will matter. You can look at one cause or effect. You can focus on a viewpoint. You can look at one group. You can ask more of the 5 W's and 1 H question, who, what, when, where, why, how. Or you can do pre-writing. And this is where I'll tell you, I do not require you to do pre-writing. I do not require you to do anything like this. But I will always encourage it. I will encourage you to try brainstorming or maybe listing out ideas and thoughts, but I will never make you do it. I find me personally, I like making lists. That just works best for me. But we need to slow down just a little bit because we jumped a little bit ahead, and that's okay because I want to talk about the process. And really, what I mean is the process of conducting research and doing this early stuff. And so first step really is choose a topic. Not kidding. That's your first step in this whole process is to choose a topic. And honestly, I encourage you to pick many topics. I encourage you to think of many different things. Your proposal that you will submit, that there will be a separate little video on, you will only do one topic. But I encourage you to have backups in case after I look at your proposal, I go, yeah, I don't think this is a good idea. Maybe you should try something else. If you have other ideas, you're not starting completely from scratch. But truly, first step, choose a topic. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have had, in my 9 years of teaching this type of class, I have had a wide range of students choose topics. One student looked at the importance and relevance of public libraries and did a little deeper research into what they're actually doing to stay afloat. One student did an argument for recess in not just K through like 4, but all the way through high school. And they did research looking into studies about unregulated free time and its impact on education. I've had students explore why people are drawn to lighthouses. I'm not kidding. That was a student's English Comp 2 research paper proposal and paper was what is it about lighthouses that attracts people towards them, that people want to go visit and look at and think about and all that. And yeah, the choices are endless. The topics, let it be something that you care about. So those are just some topics. Like I said, I will actually go over a couple examples of proposals in the brief video overview. Trust me, you'll know when we talk about it. Anyway, once you've chosen a topic, the goal really should be to narrow your topic. Because a lot of time, this first step of choosing a topic, you tend to have a lot of different ideas. And even if you only have 1 or 2 ideas, I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of times they tend to be broad. So, for example, the student that wanted to talk about lighthouses, that's what he started with, was lighthouses. And in class, he said, I want to write about lighthouses. And I said, okay, well, what about lighthouses? What about lighthouses do you want to write about? And he actually thought about it, and he looked at me, and he said, have you ever been to a lighthouse, just, as it looks out the water, and you ever just stare there and look out into the lake or to the sea or to the ocean or whatever, and you just kind of, you see beauty, and there's just something about it that's magical. And in that moment, I went, okay, yeah, I think I can actually help you get there. And I think what you're looking at is what is behind the beauty or the mystery of a lighthouse. And so, yeah, we narrowed down this topic from just I want to write about lighthouses to what is the psychology behind people wanting to go and look at lighthouses. So there are things that you can do that may not seem like a research question, but it can be. So once a topic is narrowed down, you want to really explore a topic. And what I mean by that is free write. And what I mean is, write down everything you know. Write down all the different crap. Dig deep into it. What exactly is your topic about? What kind of cool things are there? Going with my lighthouse example. How many lighthouses are there in the United States? How many of them are decommissioned? How many are still active? How many are right on the shore? How many are inland? And all that stuff, that is what I mean by explore. Explore the topic. Figure out all this other stuff. And then conduct preliminary research. And if you've had me for English Comp 1, I refer to this as baby research. I'm talking entry level, nothing serious. I'm not asking you to spend hours at the library. I'm not asking you to spend, 4 days looking into something. No. Preliminary research. Entry level, easy stuff. Google, Wikipedia, talking to a librarian. Heck, Mary will help guide you in the right direction. But just finding some early level information. Because honestly, once you know a little bit about your topic, then you can start forming your research questions. Please note, this whole thing is about research questions, and that's not even the first step in the process. Because exactly that, the process itself is long, has a lot of different steps, and so yeah, your research question should come after you kind of have an idea of what it's going to look like. And after you have a question, then start working on a thesis. Your thesis doesn't have to be correct. It doesn't have to be done. Just starting to work on it. And then create a proposal. You're going to say what exactly you want to find out and how you're going to do it. That's what a proposal is. So that does seem like a lot of things, but how the heck do you manage? Well, it's a lot like eating an elephant. You take it bit by bit, piece by piece. So, honestly, at this stage, because we are just starting out, choose your topic. And I know, I've said this now like 5 times because I mean it. This is the first step. This is where you are. Choose your topic. After you've chosen a topic, then I'm going to encourage you to plan out your research and writing. I mean, figure out how much time can you dedicate. If you are working a regular job at traditional hours, 9 to 5 p.m., and you have a family you have to take care of, how many hours a day do you have to dedicate? If it's less than an hour, okay. You can work on that. You can say, okay, I have 20 minutes a day I can dedicate to research. Great. Then maybe spend Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday researching, and Thursday and Friday, those 20 minutes, writing out what you've learned from your research. That's what I mean by planning. It doesn't have to be this big fancy thing. It can be very casual. Then, once you've planned it, start researching. Like I said, there's no one right way to research, so get out there. Look for some information. Find something new. But after you've gathered all of it, I cannot tell you this strongly enough. From students who have gotten overwhelmed and have struggled with this, please organize your research. After you've done all this stuff, make notes to yourself of what's important, what it's talking about, where you might put it in your paper. Because if you organize it, it's going to be so much easier. But after you've organized it, start drafting. Write the paper. And revise and repeat whatever's needed. Let's say you have a topic figured out, you plan out your research, you do the research, you organize it, and you start writing it, and then you go back and you're like, I need some more information here. Guess what? Go back to step 3. Do more research. You don't need to start from the beginning. Just go back and do more research. organize the new stuff, put it into the paper, revise, see if it needs any new things. If it needs more, go back to step 3. See how that works? That's what we mean by managing. Taking it step by step, piece by piece, and trying not to get overwhelmed. So, this is a pretty simple slide, and it speaks for itself, but I say this as somebody who's taught well over 100 students, definitely well over 200 or 300 at this point, about this alone. Stay organized and anticipate challenges. When you are doing research, especially academic research, it's very easy to get lost because you're looking at a lot of stuff, you're finding a lot of information, you're trying to balance all of this oftentimes with other classes and other responsibilities, so it's easy for something to slip through the cracks. So I tell you, stay organized. Some people work really well with like a folder or like a perfectly mapped out timetable, like an organizer or a planner. If that works for you, go for it. If you're someone a little more loose like me and I like just having a list and kind of figuring out what goes where, that's fine too. Make a list of what's things that you need done and mark them off as you do them. Staying organized during a research paper will help you immensely. And honestly, the challenges that come up, I say anticipate challenges like not finding sources, like your computer stops working one day, or your internet goes out. Anticipate those challenges. Anticipate those things that are going to prevent you from doing your work. I don't mean anticipate, oh, well, I just can't find this source for my topic. No, you can find something. You just have to look harder or look in a slightly different way. But anticipate those real life challenges. Anticipate Blackboard being down for maintenance. Anticipate Google just all of a sudden crashing on your computer every 5 seconds. Anticipate your toddler flushing your cell phone down the toilet. Anticipate the worst. Because if you do anticipate for it, you're going to stay on top of it and you're going to be okay. So, something that we've talked about a little bit in this class is, already at least, is drafting. So, the process of writing, a big part of it is writing drafts. And I know some people say I'm a bad teacher for this, but I do not force you to do drafts for every essay, especially not in this class. In English Comp 2, I don't think that you need to have constant drafting. However, I do think it's an important skill, and I think it's an important tool, and I will encourage you to draft even if you're not turning it in for me. But there will be one draft, that's the final draft, or rather the final essay will have a rough draft, and we'll talk about that. But some good advice for drafting at any level is, number one, be open to all feedback. Good feedback is great. Bad feedback surprisingly can be helpful because they may be wrong, but they might have identified something that you hadn't thought of, and it might be a worthwhile component to address there. Don't make major changes before you have a peer read through it. And I do mean that. Have somebody look over your work to make sure it sounds good. Even if it's just a friend, even if it's a family member, I don't care. Classmate, whatever. But don't make major changes before somebody reads through it. Because sometimes, and I've seen it happen before, students will completely remove a section from their paper thinking, oh, this is useless. And then another student reads it and goes, I have questions about this, and it's the exact thing that they took out of the paper. Don't make major changes before somebody else reads it. Because if you do, you run the chance of people saying, hey, you could talk about this, and you already did write about it and you took it out. Which perfectly goes into my next piece. Don't permanently delete anything. Let me say that again. Don't permanently delete anything. As you are writing, as you're going through the process, there's going to be times where you're going to say, yeah, this doesn't fit, and you're going to want to get rid of it. I tell you make a separate document of all the crap that you've written separately. Because there's going to come a time at some point where you've deleted something you actually should have kept. So don't permanently delete anything. I also say this to students who have gotten rid of old drafts of papers and they're like, yep, I don't need this anymore. Nope, don't be that student. You can delete everything permanently after you're done with a class. You finish a class, you pass it, go ahead, delete everything from that class if you don't need it anymore. That's fine, but while you're in the class, don't permanently delete anything. Trust me. This also goes with the not permanently deleting anything. Don't use the same document for everything. This I've seen specifically with younger students over the last 4 or 5 years, is using the same document, but just getting rid of all of the former text and putting in the new stuff. Don't do that. Just don't do that. That's a bad idea. It's a very bad idea. Just trust me. But definitely my last advice, and actually my advice that I tell every student every semester with every single written project that you will ever have for me. So if you plan on taking me for criminal justice or any English class or whatever, just write. It doesn't matter if it's crap. It doesn't matter if it's the best thing ever. It doesn't matter. Just write. It is always easier to visualize things and to make it work when it's physically there than when it's still in your mind. Just write it. Even if you're only writing for yourself, even if it absolutely looks terrible and crappy and has no grammar, no punctuation, no spelling proper, doesn't matter. Just write it. Get it out there, and once it's out there, then you can fix it. All right. So we did say that we want to refine our topic, but there is a danger in refining a topic. And that is sometimes we can get too specific or even too broad when we are refining a topic. When we try to focus in on one particular area, we can run into problems of, not having enough of a specification, so it's too broad, or sometimes we get way too specific. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that. We want to make sure that when we're refining, we're not getting it to the point where it's impossible to research, but something that is more focused. And sometimes, and this is true, we can gather too much information. I urge you, try to put a hard limit on yourself. There's a reason why, and when we get to it, the annotated bibliography is 10 sources. 10 sources is a nice, solid number that's perfectly acceptable for an essay in this course. 10 is a beautiful number. A little less is fine, a little more is fine, but don't gather too much information. If you have 20, 30 sources, I argue, what exactly did you learn? What is your voice still? Did we lose you in that information? And one thing that does happen, and I want to urge you to not do, is lose your initial focus or topic. Even if you refine it, even if you come up with new ideas, don't lose that original idea. Because sometimes when we start changing things and do that research and we readjust our topics and we readjust our thesis statements and we do all these things, we lose the topic. We lose what we started it for. And that should never be the point. The point should be to keep that initial desire, that passion that you had for that topic. Again, it's why I had a student write about lighthouses. They were really passionate about it. Don't lose that initial focus, no matter how ridiculous from the outside that seems. Keep the passion, because that's going to help you. So, let's talk about thesis statements. So how do we go from a question to a thesis? Well, honestly, you take a go at it. You try and you fail first. So if you remember, we said the research question is what helps us do the research. The thesis statement is the answer to the research question. So, yeah, we're going to have to take a go at it. We're going to take a swing at answering the question, even if we don't know all the information yet. And one way that we can start getting to that idea is to ask probing questions. Ask questions like how and why. Why are lighthouses mystical? How are lighthouses mystical? And so one thing I do like having people do is test your ideas and challenge yourself. Ask yourself, so what? Who cares? Ask that and address it. Why should somebody care about what you're interested in? Why should I care about the importance of geology? Why should I care about beauty salon tips? Why should I care about the lifespan of a beetle? Tell me. So what? Who cares? Remember, a good thesis is debatable and thought-provoking. And this is important, a thesis statement is a one-sentence long debatable claim that answers the research question. Please do not have a 3-sentence thesis statement. I will look at you and tell you that is not a thesis statement. A thesis statement is a one-sentence response. And in this process, because you are answering your question, avoid I believe and my statements. A thesis statement is not I believe that this. A thesis statement is not my thesis is. No. Do not do that. Take those I statements, those my statements out of it. No first person. So, a thesis statement. A thesis statement can change. This is important. It's not a one-time thing. If you come up with a thesis statement, it does not mean that is your only thesis statement. You can change it throughout the process. A good thesis statement comes from a good, strong question. So, hence our importance in talking about research questions. A good thesis statement is arguable. So, two sides can talk about it. A good thesis statement will act as a guide for the reader. It'll tell your audience what to expect. And a good thesis statement crystallizes your argument. And what I mean is it puts your argument front and center. It makes it very obvious to the reader what you are arguing about, as well as providing them the guide. So a good thesis statement will challenge common understanding. It will show complexity of the topic. It looks for gaps in the research, and it brings new methods of investigating to light. But note, there's a fifth thing on this slide. A good thesis statement will do all of these things, but I cannot emphasize enough, don't reinvent the wheel. A good thesis statement does not reinvent the wheel, and it doesn't try to. So do not reinvent the wheel. Use what information is available. And this leads me to one of my favorite things, the magic thesis sentence. So you can take this statement right here, and plug in the things that you were going to do for your thesis, and it will actually, if it makes sense, you have a good thesis statement. At least a good thesis statement beginning. By looking at blank, your subject of research, we can see the answer to your research question, which most readers don't see. And it is important to look at this aspect because, and you give relevance. So those three things, the subject of your research, the answer to your question, and the relevance, if you can put those three things from your thesis statement here, you got a good thesis statement. Yeah, this is just a skill, a tool that I encourage students to use because it is helpful. So here are Mr. Wheaton's rules for good thesis statements. And honestly, they're pretty straightforward. Be a little strange. If your thesis statement sounds a little weird to anyone other than you, that's a good thing. It means it's going to provoke thought. It's going to make people want to know more. So if it's a little strange, it's beautiful. It's going to be one of the best ways to get people to engage with your content. Number 2, definitely provide a roadmap for your reader. Do not tell them explicitly, this is everything I'm going to talk about. That's a bad thesis statement. A good thesis statement will show you exactly what they're going to be talking about, but not with every detail. You'll know, oh, if they're talking about art, they're going to be talking about color, they're going to be talking about shading, and they're going to talk about emotion. That's pretty straightforward. But that's only the roadmap. Talking about the inner workings of those things, that we don't necessarily know from the thesis statement. Okay? Number 3, fit into the magic thesis sentence. Take your thesis statement, take these pieces out and plug it in. If it works, it's a good thesis statement. Something that I've had happen in the past before with students and why I'm emphasizing it, focus exclusively on your topic. I've seen thesis statements that kind of get lost in the weeds. They start talking about other things. Nope. Only focus on your topic. And which the second part of this comes up. Irrelevant data is excluded. If it is not the answer to your research question, if it is not providing a simple roadmap of your essay, and it is not to do with your direct topic, then don't include it. It should not be part of your thesis. Which leads us to the proposal. So the proposal project, as I said, there will be a separate video on this exclusively. But for our purposes, what I want to talk about here is the proposal project for this is you are proposing to me what your research topic you want to be is. Okay? And you're doing more than just telling me I want to research geology. No. You have to have a lot more components to this. You have to do some intro level research. If you're in this class, that means you've taken English Comp 1 or transferred in an equivalent. If you took it with us, you'll remember the last project in that class was a proposal. You're doing a proposal like that, but it's an academic research proposal, so it's different in the way it plays out. But it's the same kind of structure. You're going to have an introduction, you're going to have a background, you're going to talk about your plan, and then you're going to move on. That's what your proposal is going to look like. You are proposing to me, your teacher, I want to research this topic. And this is where I'll say, in a previous semester, I had a student who their proposal was on the impact of prenuptial agreements on divorce rates. That's a very specific thing. And their proposal discussed exactly what they wanted to look into and how they were going to do it. Like I said, we'll look at some examples in the short video on the proposal assignment itself. But that's what you're doing. You're telling me what you want to research and giving me a little background. And the biggest wonderful part of this is you can use some of the stuff from your proposal in your final essay. So you don't have to rewrite everything. You can actually use things from the previous papers. I know some people get really excited about that. Which leads us to the two essays. Essay number 62, I studied buttons for 7 years, and this is what I learned. And honestly, this is really just a quick synopsis. This one is, the author conducted research and found 5 conclusions about buttons. And I want to emphasize, the author conducted research. This is what this is all about. And if you go through the essay, you can actually see the type of research they did. They read about buttons, they looked at buttons, this is what this does to you. Research at a long time will drive you a little crazy. But, so our author found that buttons aren't easy to use. They actually encourage consumerism. Button pushers are often abusive, or seen as abusive. Some of the most feared buttons aren't even real physical buttons, like the nuclear launch codes. It's not an actual button. It's a whole complicated thing and drives people crazy. Anyway, and not a lot has changed in more than a century. And that particular line about the buttons, the last one, I'd like to emphasize for a lot of subjects that students tend to write their research papers on. When I ask you to do background research, I'm asking you for history. And a lot of times, not a lot has changed in a century for a lot of topics. Some definitely do, but not all of them. And that's a problem. That's an interesting component. And I would argue if you're doing research and you find that not a lot has changed, that might be a good spot to look at for how you can do something different or what you can talk about in your research paper. And then the other one is about seed libraries. And honestly, the seed libraries one is equally depressing but interesting. And so I put the questions: what are seed libraries? Why do they matter? Who owns the seeds? And who owns the seed libraries? And what about PA laws on seeds? So I'm going to answer those questions for you. So number one, seed libraries are exactly what they sound like. They're a catalog of seeds from a particular area. So technically every state and region has their own seed libraries, or supposed to, that catalog and have a somewhat perfect genome as much as they can of a particular plant, so that in the off chance something happens, like a plant is wiped out, there is ways to repopulate and regerminate those plants. That's the purpose of a seed library. And for the most part, seed libraries are actually publicly available. They're not things that are, owned by a corporation. They're oftentimes part of the state or national level. So they're supposed to be easily accessible, and farmers typically participate in it, and a lot of individual farm individuals, and I mean like non-corporate farms, participate. And why do they matter is because they are the regional plants. They are the actual lifeblood of a region's particular plant body. It's flora. And that third question is kind of the problem. Who owns the seeds and who owns the seed libraries? A lot of seeds that are available, especially currently, are produced by a large corporation. Monsanto is one of the big ones. They own the seeds. They dictate what farmers can and can't grow. They've modified those plants. And so we have an issue where seed libraries, which are publicly owned and operated and are supposed to be, working together, there's no profits to be made by a seed library. But Monsanto selling seeds, that's profit. So there are some issues with this. And this is just more because I teach criminal justice and I think it's interesting. What about PA laws on seeds? And you can actually look up the Pennsylvania Agriculture website and see our own rules on proper seed distribution, ownership, selling, and seed libraries. We do have specific rules on it. And it's worth noting that the concept of a seed library is not a terrible idea. In fact, it's, one of those things designed for the future existence of humanity. But, it is what it is. I say that as nonchalantly as possible because the more I think about this subject, the more depressing it gets. But why these two readings? Why seed libraries and why buttons? And I leave you with that. Why? Why these two? If we're talking about refining research topics and coming up with research questions and doing preliminary research, why might we be talking about seed libraries, which is a term that most people aren't familiar with? Why might we talk about buttons, which is a really weird, broad topic? Hint, hint. Anyway, that's what I have for this. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to my lecture on this. Like I said, there will be a short video that discusses just the assignment sheet for the proposal, as well as looking at examples. I want to make sure that you are prepared for the proposal assignment. Again, it is due not this week, but next week, Friday. But that being said, journal entry 2 is due this week, And yeah, I'll see you in that short video.